Better prepared to anticipate random events. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed group of panelists. First and foremost, Executive Vice Chairperson, Apollo Hospitals, Dr. Preetha Reddy. Can we have a round of applause for ma'am? तालियां देखिए जोरदार होनी चाहिए please. CEO Petronas Lubricants India Private Limited, Mr. Pranav Bhanage, co-founder and chairman Medwell Ventures, Mr. Vishal Bali, and the moderator, Ms. Ekta Batra, CNBC TV 18. Come on, it's morning. We can do better. Let's have a big round of applause to welcome them. Over to you, ma'am.
Hope this mic is working. All right. So we are here to talk about a very interesting topic, which is basically predicting the next Black Swan event and how we can prepare for it. I hope all of you all are having a great morning. And we've all survived a very difficult 2.5 years coming out of COVID-19. So just to give you an idea, COVID-19 has not only been the Black Swan that we've faced. Black swan basically means an extremely rare occurrence which probably changes or results in a systemic change in society as well. So we have had a couple of Black Swan events. Say, for example, the success of Google, Microsoft, Apple, 9/11, COVID-19. These are examples, and a Black Swan type of event most recently has been the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well. So to discuss all of this and more in the next 1 hour odd, we'll be taking some questions from our audience as well. We have with us an esteemed panel, and there's little I can do to introduce them, so I'm just going to start talking because we have a limited amount of time. Ms. Reddy, you're in the healthcare space. You're one of the largest hospital chains in the country, and COVID-19 was a black swan in terms of the entire healthcare infrastructure space. What have your learnings been?
It truly was a black swan, and I think we were devastated. It was like a deer caught in the headlines. There was no way we had ready-made answers. We learned as we went along. I think there were a few things which really helped us overcome. I think one was just the sheer commitment of definitely the healthcare workers, incessant. The way they just stood up. They were literally soldiers in the front line. But I must also say that the support system around it, whether it was industry coming forth and saying, hey, what do you guys need? Because we know that you all are fighting a battle, and hopefully a battle you will win. So I think industry really stood up. A lot of the governments did. We work in a system where literally it's two parallels. The government sector doing a phenomenal job, no questions asked, and the private sector, and I'm talking just healthcare. But during this event, I think everybody came together brilliantly. Worked together, seamless, reached out to each other, whether it was training, whether it was new apps, whether we used digital, whether we reached drugs to remote locations where required, whether we had to, import or made in India ventilators, PPEs. You've all read that, you all know that. But the single lesson was that, when there is a crisis, everybody comes together, the barriers just disappear. And to me, that was probably the best learning ever.
Okay, Vishal, you've been associated with the healthcare space for, I think, majority of your career. Tell us from an outside perspective now, knowing the entire healthcare space so deeply, what were your key learnings for, the Black Swan event of COVID-19?
Yeah, so firstly, it's a pleasure to be here, Ekta and Preetha and Pranav. Let's just quickly roll back in terms of the Black Swan related to COVID. Somewhere we also knew that there were pathogens lurking around the world, which would eventually at some point in time blow up and cause what they did. So were we proactive enough to sort of combat it? The world was not. Therefore, the biggest lesson from here is, are we now really preparing ourselves for multiple other events to happen whether in healthcare or in other spaces of life, to be able to catch those black swans early. I think one of the biggest lessons that we in the healthcare sector and the broader ecosystem, the one that we got was the massive impact that digitization started with the COVID-19 impact, right? So suddenly the world woke up to the fact that digital healthcare ecosystems really mattered a lot more because there was just no other way to deliver healthcare to mass people. The world last year, it's close to almost about $40 billion behind health tech. But more importantly, that got raised on the back of the COVID-19 event. Because it's not that the world did not know about digitization of healthcare earlier to COVID-19, but I think the big lesson there was that this is the future where healthcare needs to come together with technology. I think the second most important one was we all understood and have understood for a long period of time that healthcare is a very underserved sector in our own country and worldwide. The US spends 16% of its GDP on healthcare. We spend 4.5% to 5%, of which the government spends just about 1%. Underspending on one of the key areas of human life is not going to continue to be beneficial to humanity at large. And so therefore, the second big lesson was that healthcare needs to be at the center of our existence, right? And therefore, a lot more needs to be done behind this sector as the world goes and moves forward. So to my mind, I think as I looked at the entire ecosystem, because I also do the entire funding side of things, I think there are multiple lessons that COVID-19 has left us with. And if we don't pick up these pieces now, we are probably sitting for the next black swan to happen again. There are viruses that are stemming at us all around, and you never really know which is the next one now, until unless we are far more proactive on research, development, and combating issues before they are beginning to happen and staring at us.
You know, I'm just going to get back to this point about the fact whether this is a structural change that we're going to see in healthcare. But I can see Pranav nodding his head because he wants to come in and provide some comments on his perspective. Pranav, you know, you don't run a healthcare company, but you run one of the most successful companies, part of one of the most successful companies in the world. So give us your perspective. How did y'all manage this kind of a black swan event? And separately, y'all are also facing headwinds from, say, the Russia-Ukraine crisis because your business is entirely related to commodities such as crude.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on this platform. Yeah, I'm the non-healthcare guy here, so I'll give a different perspective. For me, if you look at the black swan, I think if you translate that into a business black swan, so we spoke about the human lives. I think we all were affected by it. I was personally affected. But from a business perspective, you know, two things changed. I think when we make a business plan, you know, you assume that the supply and demand would be parallel and constant. So you only create demand and you don't really look at the supply side. And no business plan is made with a zero demand or an excess supply or a zero supply excess demand. So the translation of that event, say COVID, was the demand drops to zero, and then what you do to survive, and how do you really pull the company through that kind of a crisis. So to manage that, of course, there were different elements of it. First, humanitarian side, business planning side, how you come out of it. But what's more important here is that, you know, given this, whether this congruousness of supply and demand, will it continue? I think that's what is coming into the boardrooms now. When we plan for the future, are we going to say, shall we plan that we will have enough supply, or shall we plan that there will be no demand disruption? Or shall we start taking that cognizance of that fact, and then you make the systems more agile and relevant to that particular scenario? So in terms of managing it, I think a lot has changed from our internal process perspective. A lot has changed in terms of how we look at the future and how that translates into the actions. On a separate note, I think you mentioned about Ukraine crisis, and there was a very interesting discussion earlier where Europe is the most integrated of all the continents, and it was truly a black swan. And that's the sort of the second black swan that has hit us, particularly our industry, after when we were just rising out of the COVID, getting to a better demand situation, the supply disruption has really hit us. And I think it's hit everybody who is dependent on crude, whether it's an input or a commodity that you use as a raw material, etc. The answer of how we're going to really take it forward, how do you anticipate it, I think will lie in the discussions we can have in terms of how you use data, how you use AI, how do you use sort of other crystal balling techniques to figure out, what's going to happen next. I'll leave it with one note in my opening comment is that my reflection on the crisis, I saw that there were 3 stages of evolution for organizations. I think number 1 was reaction. I think what Preeta just mentioned, we reacted the deer in the headlight. The second thing is about resilience, which is more of saying that I come out of this safe and sound, and I remain the same as I was as before the crisis. The third part, which I have started to personally believe, is anti-fragile. So what anti-fragile means is that I use this crisis to come out better than what I was in the past. So
Okay, so that's actually what I wanted to concentrate on, because you mentioned anti-fragile, Vishal mentioned whether we can pick up the pieces. And the point of a lot of the black swan events is that we eventually see systemic change which comes through, and maybe a structural change in terms of the way we function. It could be technology, it could be drug discovery, it could be various different things. We were pushed to the corner, and we managed to do that in COVID-19, and we were able to showcase our abilities in terms of healthcare. But Ms. Reddy, will that stay, or do you think complacency is going to set in and we're going to get back to our old ways?
I don't think we can afford complacency anymore, because that honestly would be quite stupid to do that. We know and we saw what happened. Again, I'm just going back to the healthcare sector. We realized that while, we fell so far short of infrastructure, and I think every government globally is now thinking of building infrastructure. Then we said, let's use AI to predict, because the moment you can predict the onset of disease, you can actually do something about it. Digital got adopted like within a blink of an eyelid, because we said, listen, that's the only answer. So everybody realized the power of digital. And we were just talking, and we said we've cut down travel time so much because we found better efficiency and better systems in place. So I think complacency won't happen. We will not go completely back to our old ways. I don't see that happening. But I think just the sheer focus on research and speed of execution and delivery now has become very important, because what took a vaccine, best example, is that, what would have typically taken 10, 15 years for us to just hit the public or the masses, happened in less than a year. And that was because I think we, as a human race, know we can do it. And we have to just become more responsible. We have to become so much more responsible about the environment. That worries me. We have to become more responsible about literally our own health, because the onset of NCDs is going to be huge. It's going to be humongous. So can we please take care of our health? So I think complacency now is, we have to be literally wanting to create another disaster or kill ourselves. So I don't think we do that.
But the point is, Ms. Reddy, if we were to have this conversation, say 3 years down the line, and the complacency comes from the fact that whether or not India is going to structurally improve its healthcare infrastructure. Today we have one of the lowest ratios when it comes to patients to beds, doctors, allopathic doctors to patients, nurses as well, as compared to WHO or other economies as well. Do you think 3 years down the line, this is enough of a wake-up call that these statistics are going to improve?
So I think, I haven't heard the size and magnitude of literally what the government has done of late. You know, in 24 months, there's the digital mission which has been launched, and it's clear, it's real, it's present. Ayushman Bharat, definitely gaining momentum. Focus on infrastructure, yes, I think it's happening. Creating more healthcare workforce, I think that's work in progress, but it's definitely, there's focus on it. There's so much more happening than it used to be. Do we have enough? I don't think so. You know, we don't have enough of manpower, but that will evolve. It's a 10-year play. It's, you know, we have to do it, but at least we're making huge first steps.
Vishal, what do you think? Because there is also the lack of awareness for a lot of medical conditions in India. People are now more aware, but there's less amount of insurance in the country as well. So where are we when it comes to, say, structural improvement in accessibility of healthcare and improvement of the healthcare infrastructure?
So, you know, Ekta, we have to start with the basics here. Whether it is in the corporates, or it is the political leadership, or the bureaucracy, the incentivization that we all go through for actually reacting to a crisis is very different to mitigating a crisis, right? And I would like to reinstate that again in terms of that if we do not start actually creating a lot of incentive, and what I mean by incentivization is fundamentally focusing, right? So where do you really focus your energy? As leaders, we all focus on energy in terms of there is a crisis hitting at us, let's go and find a solution for it. And then everybody claps around and says, you guys did a fantastic job, right? How many times do we really wake up to the idea that how many leaders actually out there, and I'm saying corporates too, get lauded for mitigating a certain risk? I think that's the fundamental change in attitude that is required, particularly from a healthcare perspective. And this is all around us, right? It starts with what we need to do on the infrastructure side. Now, as Peter said, that yes, there is some momentum which is happening over here. But in a country which is so starved for healthcare, there has to be an exponential drive around this sector. And this exponential drive has to get down to understanding at the base level of the infrastructure requirement of the sector. And in fact, unfortunately, over the years, again, we have reacted with cure rather than with wellness. And that's the reason why I said that where is the mitigation and where is the incentivization to create, right? So if we were constantly planning towards that we need lesser disease in this country because of our frugal availability of healthcare resources, what should have been the drive? It should have been all along around wellness, and it should have been all along around prevention. Hardly anything, right? And so that's really what we need. It's when I say baseline infrastructure, we need to go back to the base and see how much can we really prevent disease. Now that the disease is there, what is it that we need in terms of infrastructure? For a very long period of time, all of us in the sector have been talking about the resource, in terms of the underwhelming need for resources in this country, nothing was done for a very long period of time, whether it is medical education, whether it is nursing talent. So there is a massive change that is required if we are to even live healthier over the next 1 decade. And when I say as a country, I'm not saying as human beings, but I think as a country, we need to be a healthier country for us to actually add more GDP growth to ourselves. And if that becomes the classic point of mitigation, then that's where the energy should be. And has it been enough? I frankly think not yet. Because we are making incremental steps, but I don't see an exponential change in the mindset around us that we have to really go and create better healthcare in this country.
Okay, so maybe some steps, maybe big steps and small steps towards healthcare improvement. Pranav, you are a part of a larger conglomerate which has offices across the world. You probably have the best minds working for you right now, especially to try and mitigate the risk when it comes to the entire commodity inflation cycle that we've seen. What has your key learning been in order to mitigate that particular risk going forward? Yes, today we have Russia, Ukraine. Today, Europe was completely blindsided about what could happen with gas supplies. How are you anticipating the next commodity, risk going forward?
So I'll drill down into the risk aspect itself. So what does the commodity risk mean? So if you translate it into something very basic, you're using those commodities to produce something. So it's essentially a raw material risk to a larger extent. Let's keep the upstream business aside, which basically trades in crude. But for most of the businesses, that's an input cost. So when you take that step a little further and you translate that risk into what it means. So is it possible then, the questions that have been asked is that when you produce something, are there alternative ways of producing it? So, last week I was in Germany and we were talking about bio-based base stocks, so base oils, which can be used for lubricants, or purely synthetic base oils, which are made out of chemicals or some amount of waste as well. So you don't really need the hydrocarbon. So the questions are being therefore asked is that the same material, can I produce it in different ways? So therefore, I reduce the fundamental dependency on a particular commodity. And interestingly, I think what's happening, and I think it sort of cross pollinates with the conversations we're having on sustainability, is that the product that you could produce with, say, 8 elements in 1950s, the 7 out of the 8 elements are banned altogether into now. So anyway, the companies are forced to make the same, say, telecom powder or whatever shampoo without using the fundamental ingredients because they are banned for sustainable or medical issues. So I think that's the trigger point that's happening in most of the organizations, even ours, is can we then produce the same thing with using alternatives? Therefore, you're not dependent on a particular commodity.
Are you also mitigating yourself in terms of supplies from one particular region? I ask this because there has been so much focus when it came to APIs and pharmaceuticals and China. Now, are businesses rethinking themselves and saying that, no, we need to mitigate and get our supplies across regions?
No, for sure. I think there was a panel also on supply chain particularly, and a lot of organizations are looking at where we had the offshoring in 2000s. Now we're looking at onshoring or working with the suppliers to develop the technology near shore. There are also talks about vertical integration so that, can you produce some of the components yourself and very close to the markets that you're operating as opposed to bringing it aside. Because one of the impacts of the wars was also on the logistics and freight. Sometimes even the crude was available, the freight is not available. There are no vessels to ferry that material to India or the ports in Mumbai, etc. So that's triggering a conversation, and I think which Hero Group has done very well with the vertical integration. That kind of stuff is happening to most of the other organizations also.
So is that possibly the best way to mitigate? Because I don't think we can predict where the next black swan will be, but maybe supply chain efficiency is maybe the key learning, Pranav?
I think it's the approach organizations would take is portfolio. You basically have safety in numbers as opposed to having a very specialized supply in Sweden. I would at least have, say, 85% efficacy suppliers close by. So that sort of gives me the portfolio to be comfortable that if A doesn't work, B does. I'll just share an interesting anecdote I had with one of the largest OEMs in the country. And then they said that most of the sunroofs that are used in the SUVs are 95% of them are manufactured in China, and they come out of one particular port in China, which is Suzhou or Shanghai, I don't know which one. So the entire SUVs were ready, but the sunroof is not available. So they can't get it out of the fact. So they get it out of the production line, they keep it in the yard, and then wait for the sunroof to fly in later to be fixed. So those are the challenges which have come to fore in the last post-COVID, the second black swan. And then what do we do around it? I mean, do we then build a local capability? Should we have a sunroof manufacturer in India? I think there's a lot of chip manufacturing wave that is happening. So all those questions are coming to the boardrooms, and there will be responses from different organizations on how to play. Vertical integration is a thing. Supplier development is an option. Co-location of the suppliers is an option. So there are various options that organizations will take.
I think the fear is that nobody was even expecting a war to take place the way it did, because we've dealt with a lot of skirmishes before, threats before, globally, but it generally never culminates. But Ms. Reddy, I wanted your thoughts, because Pranav mentioned SUVs, and we were having this discussion in the speaker lounge about climate change, the impact on the environment. Do you think that is a formidable threat to us, and that's probably where we could also see a threat? Maybe not a black swan, hope not, but to a certain extent you're mitigating that?
I think climate change is a clear and present danger. There's no going away for it. I think Vishal was just talking about what happened to him and his family in Bangalore. And there are multiple stories about, how climate change has really been a disaster. I mean, look at UK. The parks were brown. Never happened before. They have an energy crisis in Europe. And all this is because I think number one is we haven't planned better. Number two is that I think humans as a race have been very irresponsible about the way we look at the planet and treat the planet. And we have to wake up to that call. We've had disasters, and they're happening quicker and faster. And if that isn't a call to action, I don't know what else can be.
Vishal, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm actually experiencing one right now. So during the recent floods in Bangalore, my house was completely flooded. So I'm an urban homeless human being right now. All my cars have gone, everything is gone. So the big question again, Ekta, is that climate change is here and is hitting at us. The bigger question is, are we planning anything forward to sort of combat that big risk? Are our cities doing enough? Is our planning going ahead of the climate change issues that are hitting at us? The answer to that question is again, no. You see the massive floodings that are happening in city after city. And earlier we used to think, floods happen in rural areas. They happen to seashore areas. They are now happening everywhere. So are we really mitigating that issue? The answer again is, yeah, we are creating new drainage systems and all that, but are we creating them for the next 50 years, or are we making them more relevant for the next 1 year? So the issue that I really see around is that I think our forward-looking thought processes on many of these events that are hitting not just us as a country, but around the world, at least we seem to be reacting a lot more slowly towards them. And we started with healthcare. That is even worse right now, given that COVID will actually keep pushing us, because there are other issues that the world is already beginning to see post-COVID, right? People are falling down to other viruses very, very quickly than what they used to. Our immunity systems as human beings is probably at the lowest right now, in spite of all the booster shots and everything that we've taken. You look at the world and the next big black swan, which can probably happen around the interconnectivity that is there on information technology, right? One hack could actually stop the world. And are we really doing enough to mitigate that risk? How are we distributing, we've been far too central in our thinking, and the world has been far too central in its thinking, and how is it sort of disaggregating itself so that when issues like these happen, they don't really take the entire world with it together, like the COVID-19 impact. And so are we actually decentralizing things? We were talking about supply chain. the next big issue which is really going to hit us is the entire shortage of semiconductors. And in fact, I can see it hitting medical technology today. You know, Preeta would know that the lead time for MRIs and CT scans and ventilators now is 6 months. You talk to any of the big providers of medical technology and they say we are not in a position to manufacture because there are no semiconductors. So what are we planning to do around semiconductors itself? Are we decentralizing the creation of semiconductors around the world? Or are we still going to be hopeful that one country will come and save us? So there is a lot that we need to keep thinking forward on. And I don't think that the redundancies that we need around infrastructure, around technology and information technology, healthcare, is enough for the next big black swan.
So you mentioned digitization as the big positive. Yes, go ahead. Yes, just last question. Just a quick last question, Vishal, and I'm going to throw it open to the audience. You mentioned technology, you mentioned digitization. Do you think technology can actually be used to predict where the next biggest risk is coming from?
I think absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. And we need to really go after that a lot more. You know, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics. A lot of this has to now form into every bit and every organization and every corporation that we actually run, not just in healthcare, but in everything else around us. Because we frankly don't know which industry is next going to be susceptible. The last big black swan was healthcare. We don't know where it is next. Right? So I think we need to be far more predictive all around the world in combating what is coming at us next. And as I said, that I see the massive world's interconnectivity around information technology, that is the most susceptible issue that we are probably sitting on today.
Okay. Well, now I think we have around 8.5 odd minutes. So let's open this to questions. So go ahead.
My suggestion to the organizers of the event is that the discussion should be made interactive. It should be two ways. One thing. Yeah. And then healthcare. Healthcare is divided into two parts. One is prevention, the other is cure. Prevention part, if it is taken care, then probably doctors will die rather than the patients dying. That prevention is in our arms. That we have to take care. But as regards cure, the cure stems from the training of the doctors. The students who are now studying, they are being taught from the 20 years old books, the same book. Say for example, if heart is to be explained, they draw the arrow. Yeah, that is what I'm saying, sir. Yeah. How prevent that? I mean, unless it is 3D animation teaching, probably doctors will not get proper training. It is 2D. So my question is that how do that? So, how many of you are doctors?
So let me answer that question to you,
Yeah.
that the next big healthcare agenda is probably not going to be just driven by medical or medicine. It is actually going to be the conversion of engineering and medicine that will actually create the next big wave of the future of healthcare. And training and using engineering, using technology for training for medical students is going to really create better medical students of the future.
Well, we have Ms. Reddy, do you want to add on to that?
So I think, if you look globally and go to some of the best centers, one of their key areas are the simulation labs. And that didn't exist before. So, really speaking, a student can go through a whole process, learn what he has to do in these simulation labs. Same thing is happening with flights. Why are we saying that the pilots today are not trained as well as they were earlier? Because they have simulation systems, and the aircrafts have the systems to really go on autopilot. And healthcare, to a large extent, is heading that way. But when I say that, there is this question of high tech. We really do need to adopt to high tech because it's available and we have to do it. But we should never lose the high touch, because I think that is where we stand apart. That is where it's really important that the high touch, it really gives the clinician more time for the high touch. And healthcare systems like all of us are developing what is called a CDSS, which is a clinician's decision support system. And this is globally adopted. It is there on all our information, our systems which hospitals adopt. And this will help them get to a diagnosis quicker, faster, more accurate, and definitely it will cost them also much less. People talk about multiple scans, multiple tests, but if we have these decision supports, which is then adoption of technology, it will get much better. And we're seeing that happening in multiple economies. And I think India adopts to technology much quicker and faster than any other country. So I think 5 years from today, if we're all around and discussing this, we will be in a much better space.
We have one gentleman there.
Yeah, Ms. Dr. Preeta, I think yesterday there was a report by committee. They have come out with a very clear message that there was lapses on part of some hospitals, and that's why so many people could not be survived. We survived in India in comparison to Europe and the rest of the world because our food habits and our so-called indigenous or a traditional medicine was quite helpful. So why not to encourage this type of alternative medicine or traditional food habits, a traditional medicine, so that we can survive much more better than any of the crises?
I think, sir, the very fact that you're asking this question is that there's been so much awareness of late. There's so much awareness on traditional medicine. Again, the government is supporting it. It has become the norm. And the Western world is looking at us so much more than we're looking at ourselves. So you will see that happening.
Okay, well, just on the previous point was also the point of innovation, because we managed to expedite innovation when we were in a crisis. Can we do that going forward? That's the key point. But we have another question in the audience, so go ahead.
Mr. Vishal, extremely sorry to listen about your losses, personal losses, very sad, but we pray the life will come back to normal again.
Thank you very much.
My question is it due to, should we blame climate change, or is it the bad town planning? Because it is not only the case of Bangalore, but little rain in NCR, Gurgaon, and we have seen, kilometers of traffic jam, and the life gets miserable. So I think nature is very, very predictive. Though there are certain indications of climate change, but nature follows its rules and regulations meticulously, but it also retaliates when these fundamental rules are broken, particularly by human being like us. So I think this is the bad town planning which is more responsible for such kind of crisis, I think.
No, you're absolutely right. I think what we are facing, and this is not just in one city, right? This is across our cities, across the country. And therefore, when you today take a look at some of our tier 2 cities are much better planned than some of our bigger metros. Over a period of time, because we were concentrated in our metros and all the commercial activities were happening in the metros, there has been complete lack of creating proper governance around how these cities have to live. and the infrastructure, the back-end infrastructure, the front-end infrastructure. We don't have proper roads, we don't have proper drainage systems. Many of our cities still have drainage systems of the British Raj, right? So I think we have a lot to do in terms of if we have to come out of, and frankly, the next big black swan, which climate change is going to throw at us. And that's the reason why I'm saying that are our cities as well prepared to take the next big event which climate change will throw at us? The answer to that question is no. Because today we are seeing flooding happen with little rain. Tomorrow we may have incessant rain for weeks together, and our ecosystem cannot take it. So that's very, very true. We need a very different thought process around city planning, town planning, planning of even smaller areas within our cities. So sub-thinking around how the city can be divided and governed better.
Okay, well,
Like the country, state, and then the cities.
Okay, well, we have around 45 seconds left, so we're just going to end this conversation by asking one quick question to our panelists. One-word answers. Ms. Reddy, where do you think the next black swan is going to emerge from?
I think it's really going to be from being able to access materials, semiconductors, stuff like that. And unless we risk mitigate now, the crisis could deepen.
Pranav?
I have two. I think one climate related, although climate per se is not a black swan, but what it will throw at us, I don't know. The second is cyber. I think we are too digital and everybody is going gung-ho on digital. I don't know. I mean, it's a risk.
You got to mitigate your risk there. And lastly, Vishal.
So, cyber definitely one. And I think the next one, again, the global financial markets are not in a great shape even today. We are still reeling under the Lehman activity, and I don't think we've really come out of it. And as the world is going through again the current financial disruption, I think we should be preparing ourselves for the next big event even on that side. So, but I think the big one, frankly, which worries me is the entire sensitivity to cyber attacks.
Okay, all right. So cyber is probably top of mind right now. Ms. Reddy, Pranav, as well as Vishal, thank you very much for joining in to this conversation, which has been extremely enriching. Thanks very much.
A big thank you to our panelists. I would request you to please remain seated. We have an audience question inspired by this fabulous session. So can we have the question, please? But before that, we have a directive message just to show you how to use the remote. There's a CE button. Long press that, you switch it on. Only once you have to switch it on for the entire day. And you will get the option between A, B, and C. Whatever you choose as the option, press that. And on the top right corner, you see the green cursor. That is where you press the OK. Right? So just press CE, long press, to switch it on once for the entire day. So can we have the question, please? It is mostly human behavior that shapes the emergence and impact of black swan events rather than nature. A for agree, B for disagree, and C for can't say. So let's see what the polls say. Okay, the numbers are going up and down. Okay, quite a few fluctuations went up. Okay, 83.02% agree. Can we have a round of applause on that? Zordar Talia, this was a very informative session. Would request from Bosch family, Mr. Manohar Halahaliji, Regional Vice President, India Two-Wheeler and Power Sports Division, to kindly grace the stage and present mementos to our esteemed group of panelists. Can we have a round of applause for sir? Thank you. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it's a 15-minute break. 12 o'clock we reconvene. This is a tea and coffee break. आपसे गुजारिश है अपने remotes table और chair पर ही छोड़ दीजिए. Do not carry them. 15 minutes is what you have, ladies and gentlemen. वापस जब आएंगे आपको फीडबैक फॉर्म्स दिए जाएंगे. आपसे गुजारिश है फीडबैक फॉर्म जरूर भरिएगा. And after a while we have our team to come and collect it. Feedback forms will be given to you after the break itself. It's a 15-minute break. Thank you.